I woke up this morning, and I'll tell you this, and so I got in at 11:30 last night because I went up to Anderson for some IYC planning meetings. Could have stayed this morning, gone to church with the team up there at a church in Anderson. Could have spent a little bit more time with them. Could have had a little bit more free food. Would have been this great time. And when we were planning the meetings, I told them, like, this is the week after Easter. I don't want to miss the week after Easter. I want to, not that I ever want to miss, but of all weeks, I was like, I don't want to be gone Easter or the week after Easter Sunday morning. I want to be with these people right here. So I drove back, got in at 11:30, got to bed at midnight-ish, 12:30. I don't know, I didn't really pay attention. And I woke up this morning, so I slept on the couch because Sarah kicked me out of the bed because I got home too late. So I slept on the couch. All the windows were open. The breeze is coming through. Minus the dogs down the road that started barking at 5:30 in the morning. I wake up and I hear these birds chirping and this breeze coming through, and it's, 65-ish degrees. I don't even know what it was. The ceiling fan is blowing down, and I woke up and like, let's do this thing. Like, I am pumped for Sunday morning this week. I got over here at 8, and I'm like, where is everybody? I want to do this thing right now. I don't want to wait until 10 o'clock. Let's do this thing right now. And then I had to wait for 2 more hours. I will say I am still every bit as excited as I was 2 hours ago to be in here worshiping with all of you, to be celebrating what we celebrated last week, that we get to celebrate every single week. But I do acknowledge that Monday comes every single week, just like we talked about last week. And that Monday feels different than Sunday, just like the week after Easter feels different than Easter Sunday morning. And so I want us for this is going to be about 6 or 7 weeks, we're going to talk about Monday every single week that we come in here. As you look at Scripture, as we read through the story of Scripture, we see this big climactic moment of Jesus raising from the dead, rising from being dead for 3 days. And we skip past some stories and we skim through a few, but the overarching story going on here is that Jesus has defeated death, and now he's appearing to different people. And I don't know about you, but it's really easy for me to kind of stop at Easter Sunday morning and just talk about that and not talk about what he did for those next 40 days that he walked, 50 days until Pentecost Sunday, when the Holy Spirit comes upon the church, and we refer to it as the birth of the church. Until that day, what happened in that time? And what I think happened in that time is Jesus prepared people for Monday. Jesus, they got to see him, and that was exciting. The ones who actually witnessed him walking among them, no longer dead, they got to see him. But in those conversations where they saw him, he prepared them for Monday, when they would no longer physically see him. When things get hard on Monday, it's easy when you're walking right there with him and you feel his presence right there, and there's no question Jesus is here. It's in those moments where you don't have that emotional feeling that he's right there that things get hard. And he prepared people for what that was going to be like. He prepared them, and in doing so, he prepared us. As I read through the story, and I'll be honest with you because that's what I like to do, I never actually caught the fact that he never appeared to a non-believer, that's written down anyway. He never appeared to somebody who wasn't already a follower of his in those 40 days after his death until he ascended into heaven. Like, you read the part of the story before he died, and he's having interaction with all sorts of people that don't follow him, don't believe in him, don't know who he is. They might be excited about the stories that they've heard about him, but they don't believe in this Jewish God that he is. They don't believe for sure that he could actually be a God until they meet him, until they interact with him, and he's constantly reaching out and being amongst all these people. But in those 40 days, he spends time with his followers because he knows you're going to need to be prepared for Monday. Right now, you've had me with you. you're going to need to be prepared for Monday. I believe that even though I don't really know anybody who gets excited about Monday, I've never seen a meme that I can remember. I've never seen a quote that was like, hey, you know what my favorite day of the week is? Monday. I love Monday. Monday's the day I get to go back to work. It's awesome. All that free time I had for the last 2 days, oh, it's gone. Now, I don't get free time anymore. It's incredible. I've never seen that. But Jesus is saying, no, there are exciting things that happen on Monday, and I want you to be ready for it because you're going to need to be able to work through some of those things that aren't exciting. So we're going to spend some time over the next 7 weeks working through 4 chapters of Scripture. And we're going to start this morning with Luke chapter 24. If you want to open it up and if you want to read along with me, many of you will have already known this story, but that's okay. It's good for us to reread it. It's good for us to remind ourselves of what happened, who he walked with, who he talked to, what he told them, and what in the world that has to do with us, because that conversation happened 2,000 years ago. How could it still be relevant for us today? So in Luke chapter 24, we're going to start in verse 13. It says, that same day, 2 of Jesus' followers, so by that same day, let me set this up for you real quick. When it says that same day, it's talking about that same Easter day, that same day that he rose from the dead. This isn't Monday yet. This isn't Tuesday. This is still Sunday when he rose from the dead. And whether it actually happened on a Sunday, we're not getting into that theological discussion. We're just going to say on that Easter day, this is still that day. This is after he has appeared to the women and to Peter and to John at the tomb. This is before a lot of the other stories that we're going to read. So this is pretty quick after the resurrection of Jesus. That's the setting that we're sitting in right here right now. He is about to appear to 2 completely unknowns. A name is mentioned in here, but it's not a name that we come across in the rest of the story as we read through the Gospels of Jesus. It's Cleopas, and it's like, oh, okay, who's this guy? Glad you told us. The other guy's name is never mentioned in this story. So Jesus, in this story, is coming along 2 completely unknown people. It's unexpected. They think he's dead. They're not expecting to come across Jesus. But what it does do is it continues to give more undeniable proof that Jesus really did rise from the dead on that Easter Sunday morning. It is unmistakable as we read through some of the details in here. And as we have even more people who can share the account of interacting with a risen king, with Jesus Christ. And so all those things are going on in this story as we read in Luke chapter 24. That same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, and remember, 7 miles, they didn't jump in a car and then drive down to not even quite to Vincennes or Petersburg or maybe a little bit past Wheeling. No, they were walking on this road, so this takes a little bit of time. They're not as fast as our cross-country runners here in South Knox. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. But God kept them from recognizing him. This is a little side note, but this is one of those parts of the story that always gets me. And with so many of these stories where I sit there and I just think, what exactly did they see? Who did they see? How did God keep them from recognizing Jesus? You read other stories where they're getting ready to try and kill Jesus, and they have him up against the cliff, and then just all of a sudden he just walks through the crowd. And you're like, wait, how did they all of a sudden not know who this guy was? Why? God does incredible things, impossible things. Some of them we're going to understand, some of them we're not. So it's just one of those things that continues to blow my mind. We're going to look at a story next week or the week after where Jesus does another one of those things that you just sit there and you're like, what did that look like? I would have loved it. But anyway, that's all beside the point. In verse 17, he asked them, what are you discussing so intently as you walk along? They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. And then one of them, Cleopas, replied, you must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened here the last few days. And just picture this, Jesus looking at them going, what things? I have no idea what you're talking about. Please explain this to me. The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth, they said. He was a prophet who did powerful miracles. And he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We'd hoped he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they'd seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the women had said. And then Jesus, hearing this, instead of being like, whoa, that's incredible, he looks at them and he says, you foolish people. Wait, what? You find it so hard to believe that what all the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory? And then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. By this time, they were nearing Emmaus and the end of their journey, and Jesus acted as if he were going on, but they begged him, stay the night with us since it's getting so late. So he went home with them, and as they sat down to eat, he took the bread and he blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to him, and suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And at that moment, he disappeared. Another one of those, what do you mean he disappeared? Like he was sitting there and then he wasn't sitting there? Or he got up to go to the bathroom and just never came back? What happened here? What do you mean he disappeared? We don't know. They said to each other, didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us? And within the hour, they were on their way back to Jerusalem. I want you to just for a few moments this morning, join me in just kind of digging into this story a little bit deeper and putting ourselves in this story and what does this mean for us? 2 years ago, a little bit over 2 years ago, my parents decided that they were going to finally go on an anniversary trip that they had been planning for years. We had they've got 5 boys. We had all contributed money to this trip over the course of time, and they'd been accumulating it. They were excited about it, and they finally made their plans to go on it, and they left on their trip. It actually coincided with, they knew that we were about to move here, so unbeknownst to any of you, they stayed a night in Vincennes. They ate at the Ponderosa Steakhouse. I think upon my recommendation, I don't remember if their timing worked out, they went and got some Zip and Sip before they left town, because I told them that's one thing you have to do while you're in town. And then they drove by the church, and they looked at it, like, wow, that's like in the middle of nowhere. What's going on there? And then they just kept on driving. They made their way out kind of to the coastal area, and eventually they made their way down to Florida. They got to eat at one restaurant that I recommended to them in the Orlando area that I've gotten to eat at. And they walked into this restaurant, which is typically very busy. The first time I went there, I didn't get to eat there because it was a 2-hour wait for breakfast. And they walk in, and there's nobody in the restaurant. No one, other than the people who are serving the food. And they eat in the restaurant, and they've been listening to the news the whole time as they're going on this trip that they've been looking forward to these however many years it was leading up to it. And finally, when they get down to Florida, they get to spend one meal in this completely empty restaurant. Now, the food was still delicious. And they got to go to the beach and just stand there and let the water hit their feet. And then they got in the car and they started home because everything closed down. Florida was no longer open. And they were sitting there and they're like, we got to get out of here before we're trapped here. And so they started their journey home. Now, I think on their way home, they ended up staying with my younger brother. But, they can do that anytime. That's not the big anniversary trip they were looking forward to. And I imagine, I wasn't in the car with my parents, but I imagine that on that drive from Florida to Oklahoma City, where my brother lives, there was a little bit of conversation about the disappointment that they felt of this trip that they had been looking forward to for so long, that they started hearing these rumors when they took off, And then they started hearing more on the news as they were on their trip. Pull out your phone, look at the app, turn on the radio, whatever it is. They started hearing these rumors that things were starting to shut down, and then it just did. And there was nothing for them to do. And so the disappointment that they would have talked about on that drive, I can only imagine what those conversations were like. You look at these two men walking along the road. They thought that this Jesus was going to be the guy who was going to free them from the oppression of the Romans, who was going to free them from this dictatorship of the Roman people telling them everything they could and couldn't do and kind of giving them permission to do all the things that they should just be able to do. They thought that's who Jesus was. But 3 days earlier, it had all been ripped out from underneath him because Jesus was dead. And so they're walking along this road. Now, they've heard this really ridiculous story that Jesus is no longer dead. And so I imagine that's creeping into it a little bit, but maybe I'm putting too much of my human nature into this story. But I'm reading this story, and I'm thinking through how I would have talked about this. Oh, I would have been talking about his death. I would have been talking about his crucifixion. I would have been talking about his disappointment. And I know that because that's what I do now in life. That's what you do now in life. We talk about these things that are going on around us that we're disappointed by, these things that are just, everyone's talking about them, and we're one of them. And so they're doing that. They've got this little element here of, I don't know if there's this little tiny seed of hope that maybe he really isn't dead. Maybe we were mistaken. But I think most of it, as they're having this discussion, is, wow, those crackpot conspiracy theorists who think that he's not actually dead. Those women who don't think he's dead. Women, they hold on to hope way too long. I mean, yes, it was confirmed by some of the dudes, so that helps. That he actually, that Peter and John are also saying this happened, but surely there's no way. And so they're walking down this road, and they're having this discussion. Just disappointment written all over their faces. And suddenly this random person comes walking up into their conversation. He's like, hey, what you talking about? And they just look at him like, we're talking about the same thing everyone is talking about. Like, just think back to the last 2 years. How many conversations did you have that didn't at some point talk about COVID in some way or another? Like, it crept in, it still does, into almost every conversation. Maybe it's starting to trickle out a little bit, but also not really. I was up in Anderson. We were there to talk about IYC, and at some point while we were there, we talked about COVID. We've got someone from D.C., we've got 2 people from the Indy area, we've got one from Michigan, we've got me down here in southern Indiana, and we all have very different experiences with COVID. And so we talked about it. It just comes up. We talked about disappointments with it, of 2020 being canceled, and what that means is our numbers are down for this year. I mean, it comes up. And so Jesus walks up on them, and he just asks them, what are you talking about? And they're like, we're talking about the same thing that everybody is talking about. How have you not heard this story? And so they fill him in a little bit of, there was this Jesus from Nazareth, and this is what he was supposed to be. I can't say for sure, but I think they probably said a little bit more than the one sentence that got written down. Please understand that Scripture is not verbatim the conversations that happened. Otherwise, they had some really boring conversations, if we're being real. Like, who talks like that? They weren't there to give us the 5,000-word essay on every conversation. They were there to give us the point of the conversation. So they fill him in a little bit on, this is what we're talking about. This is what happened. And they get to this point where they're like, and the women went up there, and the women came back. And you need to understand that this is something that God shows us in the midst of this story that we can just so quickly skip over, is that God used people who were undervalued to share his story. When they say the women, you know why they don't say when Mary went up there? They just say the women, because all they were was just women. You think that there's struggles now, and there are with gender equity. Magnify it for what they went through back then. Now, it's not to downplay what we go through now. That's to say it was so much worse. They were just women. We can't trust what they have to say. But when the men went up there, well, that captured a little bit more. When Peter and John, some of our men, when they went up there, that held a little bit more credit. But even then, yeah, God values the undervalued all around us, which means we should value the undervalued all around us. And not sit there and be like, well, that person, man, do you see their house? They obviously don't have life together. We're not going to listen to what they have to say. They can't keep their finances together. We're not going to listen to what they have to say. Look at them over there. Like, we can go through the whole list of all the different ways that we undervalue people, and God looks at them and says, I'm going to use them. I'm going to use them to share this story. Sometimes he does it because he's sitting there and going, because you are too busy looking down your nose to understand that I've got a message for you to share. You're too busy thinking you're high and mighty. Here's the news flash. I'm the mighty one, not you. And they're willing to recognize that, and they're going to share that story. God values the undervalued. So then he goes on, and he starts to share this story with them, and they're walking along this road. And he just starts walking them through the scriptures. He starts walking them through all these different ways that the Old Testament, that piece that, you hear me say this a lot, that piece that we don't like to read, that piece that's boring, that piece that has all the old stuff in it, that piece that has all these prophecies in it that Jesus fulfilled, that part of it, he starts to walk them through. Hey, this is, like, God the Father, he told you what was going to happen, and you just completely missed it because you are so foolish. Like, he uses the word foolish. I love Jesus. I love the way he just calls a spade a spade. You foolish people. And he starts to walk them through this. Church, we need to hear this. I know that Scripture doesn't necessarily have the appeal of a story in the way that it's written, in the way that maybe I don't even know what book series to point out. I'm currently reading a book series that Dara pointed out to me to read called The Queen's Thief, so I'll use that one. The Queen's Thief has where it pulls you in. It's this magical story because we don't look at it as something that actually happened. We just look at it as it's there and I don't need to read. Many of us are like, I don't like to read, and so I'm not going to read this story in the first place. But as Jesus walks them through this, he's telling them, hey, this stuff matters. This old stuff matters. You know why? Because it all pointed to me. And you're going to miss me if you don't pay attention to all of the stuff around me that points to me. We were having a discussion in our planning team meeting yesterday of, the question was asked, what's one of the reasons that you think it's so hard for people to declare Jesus? For people to go out and to just boldly proclaim what he did and who he is and what they believe about him. And it was pointed out that we think one of the reasons is people don't give him credit for anything anymore. We don't look for him in anything anymore. So why would we then talk about him? We don't spend any time reading about the things that he did. We hear about it on Sunday morning from the guy or girl standing up front, but that's our Bible reading for the week. We're not going to waste our time doing that stuff at home, that's for sure. I've got more important things to do. But then we also, as we go around, so I remember my grandpa, as we would drive down the road, I can't tell you how many times we almost drove off the road because he was busy pointing out, like, man, that sunset that God gave us is so beautiful. And I'm sitting here going, yeah, it is. I don't really want to drive into the sunset right now. Can you please look back at the road, Grandpa, as we're, just about in the ditch. But it was just like this constant thing with him. My grandpa was one of those people that, he had his imperfections, no question about it. But he was always looking for Jesus. And he was always talking about Jesus. I mean, we talk about COVID comes up in almost every conversation, or at some point, if you're around someone for long enough, it's going to come up. Man, with my grandpa, if you were around him for any length of period of time, Jesus was going to be talked about at some point. And it's not because he wanted to slam Jesus down your throat. It's because that's what he was thinking about all the time. As these men are walking down the road, you know who they're thinking about and what they're thinking about and what they're talking about? Jesus. Their minds are already there because they are infatuated with him. They're disappointed by him because he wasn't what they thought he was going to be. But man, they're still just enraptured with this idea of Jesus. And so they're talking about him. And then he comes along and he's like, hey, you missed all of these things. And as you read through the story, it finally says that their eyes were opened. And we look at that and we're like, man, that's so cool that he opened their eyes back then. I wish he would still open people's eyes today. My question for you who believe in him, who are sitting there and thinking, man, I wish he would open my eyes to something in that way. How often are you actually thinking about him? Or are you just waiting for him to hit you with a bolt of lightning so that all of a sudden you'll have this revelation? Are you spending time thinking about him? And then my next question would be, because we so often sit here and we're like, man, I wish he would open up everybody else's eyes. As a pastor, I can't tell you how many times, and youth pastor 12 years, lead pastor now 2 years, how many times I've had someone come up to me and be like, hey, so I've got this friend, I've got this coworker, I would really like them to talk to you so that, and this is the underlying theme of what they're saying, if it's not the exact words. Megan's over here shaking her head because she knows what I'm about to say. Would you please tell them about Jesus? And in my mind, and sometimes out of my mouth, because sometimes I speak before I think, I'm thinking, hey, why don't you talk to them about Jesus? I'll talk to them about Jesus too, but why don't you talk to them about Jesus? I don't have some extra special, I'm not a biblical scholar, people. I can't speak Hebrew or Greek or any of that. So I have to buy books so that it will explain to me what Hebrew and Greek meant. I don't know it. I'm not like the Jesus expert of Monroe City. Every follower of Jesus should be, to some level, a Jesus expert because we are in relationship with Jesus. When someone comes to me, this doesn't happen, if somebody came to me, and they were like, hey, so-and-so really wants to meet my spouse. Could you tell them about my spouse? How ridiculous would that be? Like, why would I tell them about your spouse? You tell them about your spouse. Unless you don't have anything nice to say about your spouse, in which case, yes, I will talk to them about your spouse. But yet when it comes to Jesus, we're like, oh, no, I can't have that conversation. Jesus, in preparing us for Monday, was preparing us to actually be the agents that open people's eyes. He doesn't walk physically in that way amongst people anymore. He says, this is for you to do. This is for you to go and open people's eyes. Well, but in the world in which we live, you can't just talk about Jesus. People get offended when you talk about Jesus. People get upset when you talk about Jesus. Here's the thing. This goes back to that whole, are you thinking about Jesus? If you're thinking about Jesus and you're thinking about Easter and you're thinking about the freedom that he gives and the salvation that he has to offer you, I don't think you're going to be able to stop talking about Jesus, for one. And I think confidently that you're going to be able to do it in a way that won't just tick everybody off. Some people, yes, they will get ticked off no matter what. But think about it. You hear me talk about the Chiefs more than you want me to talk about the Chiefs. I completely understand that. But I talk about the Chiefs because I like the Chiefs. And because I know what's going on with the Chiefs. And I know who plays for the Chiefs until they trade somebody away unexpectedly. But I know what's going on there, and so I talk about it. It just comes up in conversation. I've not come along a Colts fan who's like, seriously, dude, I hate you because you talk about the Chiefs. If you're thinking about it, you're not saying it. So shame on you. Just tell me what you're really thinking. I talk about it because it runs through my head. You talk about things all the time that run through your head. We have the excuse of, well, but how do you just naturally bring that up in conversation? Like, that's just not going to naturally come up. If you're thinking about it, you will find a way because you will have no other choice but to bring it up. I was hanging out, like I said, with the IYC team, and one of the guys, he has no hair. He's a bald dude. He's the head of the whole IYC team, and I shared a room with him, and I got in the shower on Saturday morning, and I'd forgotten my shampoo, and he'd already taken his shower, and it ran through my head like, oh, it's fine. I'll use Adam's shampoo. And then in like the course of 5 seconds, I have this thought of, I don't have my shampoo. I'll use Adam's shampoo. Oh, crud, Adam's bald. Adam doesn't have shampoo. In the midst of that, I also looked around the shower. I'm like, does he not wash his hair? Oh, he doesn't have any hair. I thought that was a pretty funny story, and so I made sure that I found a way to bring that story up to the rest of the team. It didn't flow, but I wanted to tell them that story because I thought it would make them laugh, and for the record, it made them laugh. But I forced it into a conversation. The crazy thing is that prompted more conversation about shampoo and conditioner, and one of the guys on the team, he steals his wife's conditioner. And he wasn't telling her, and she's all of a sudden like, how come my conditioner's running out faster than my shampoo? I don't understand this. I use the same amount. They're the same size bottle. And he's like, actually, I've been using your... And then that led to a conversation about how one of them likes to use his wife's conditioner on his beard because he likes the way that her hair smells, and so it makes him think of her. And like, it just... This story, did I hear an awe over here? There's the difference between you and me. I made fun of him. You thought it was sweet. All because I really wanted to tell a story about baldness and the lack of shampoo and how I had to get back out. I so badly wanted, I don't even know why. And it prompted an awesome conversation, I think. I don't know how the rest of them feel. With a lot of laughter around a table. If it's what we're thinking about, and it's what we're passionate about, we're going to find a way to bring it up. And most of the time, it's going to prompt some sort of conversation that comes after it. Because I realize that's another part of it. Is we sit there and we're like, but I don't know what to say after I bring up Jesus. See where it goes. I didn't think that we were going to talk about stealing your wife's shampoo and using your wife's shampoo on your beard. We just saw where it went. Sometimes, man, it's going to be a crash and burn. Sometimes they're going to be like, oh, that's nice. And then they're going to turn around, they're going to walk away. Sometimes, man, they're going to say things a lot worse than, oh, that's nice. Sometimes you're going to be that person that opens their eyes. You're going to be that person that Jesus used because you, in thinking about him constantly, and not wasting the time that we have to look for how he's here everywhere we look, you, in preparing for Monday, will be ready for Monday. But if we go into Monday with no preparation, it's going to be like if you show up to work on a Monday morning and you had some big thing you had to do, or students, you show up on Monday morning and you had a big assignment you had to turn in or a big test you have to take, and you did nothing. Been there, guilty. What do you want your Monday to look like? What do your Mondays look like? Are you ready to be the person who's going to help open eyes? Are you going to be looking? Are you going to be paying attention when Jesus is there to open up your eyes? When Jesus is saying, I'm right here, when he's walking beside you, and he's telling you all of these things about himself, and you're just walking with him like, oh man, I wish I could meet that guy. As you walk beside him, hey, let me introduce myself, and you know, all these things. Or are you going to be like, wait a second, you're Jesus. You're going to have that aha moment because you've been talking about him already. On the road to Emmaus, Jesus emphasized the fulfillment of prophecy. On the road to Emmaus, he took time to point these things out to them. On the road to Emmaus, he built up his pool of witnesses. On the road to Emmaus, he connected them to each other. That very end part of it where it says that within the hour they were leaving, we're going to pick that up next week. So if you want to read ahead, you can keep reading right where we stopped. He starts to connect eyewitnesses as he emphasizes who he is, as he provides more evidence that yes, this really happened. But that was all 2,000 years ago as he prepared them for Monday. Today, on our journey, on our road, Jesus continues to open eyes. He opens our eyes if we're willing to pay attention. He opens up other people's eyes if we are willing to be used to help him open their eyes. He points us to his word. Oh, so often we don't want to go there. We don't want to read it. We don't want to pay attention to it. We don't want to see what it has to say because it's going to disrupt our lives. But he's constantly pointing us to it. Not as a, hey, you're doing all these things that you're not supposed to do, but as a, hey, do this and live life to the fullest. He's pointing us over here, not so that we can lose all this stuff, but so we can gain all of this stuff, and we can show other people how they can gain all of this stuff. Not just talk about, hey, you need to give this and this and this and this up. You need to resist all the temptation, but no, you need to fill the void with all this good stuff. Points us to his word. He opens eyes, and he reveals to us daily, if we're paying attention, that he is still king. On Easter Sunday, Jesus was not finished. He prepared them from Easter for the next 40 days, and then on to Pentecost. When he gave them his Holy Spirit, he was preparing his followers for Monday morning. In church, he is preparing us for Monday morning if we will allow him to prepare us, if we will pay attention to him, if we will stop being so distracted by all of the other things around us. I'm not saying we don't see anything around us and we act like none of these things exist. I'm not saying that, but if we will put him above those things and look for him first and think of him first and talk about him first, we will see who the king really is that we talked about last week. We will not sit there and follow all the other kings that constantly disappoint us. We will not wake up on Monday morning and be like, where did Jesus go? But instead, we can wake up on Monday morning and know that Jesus is right there. And as we go into our work week, as we go into school, as we stay home with kids and we have conversations with them, and we're to that point of like, I just want to strangle this kid. Like as we're in whatever situation we're in, we will know that he is there with us because he is king over our life. But I still say it all comes back to, as we walk down the road, are we thinking about him in the first place? Are we talking about him in the first place? Is he even a part of our lives in the first place? If we will stop clenching our eyes shut open them up to the kingdom that he has us to walk in, he will reveal himself to us. He is not dead. We talked about that last week, but we have to remember that he also is not done. He didn't stop. He continues today and he will continue tomorrow. He is not done, and we get to be part of what he's doing. That's our mission each and every week as we leave this place and as we wake up on Monday. We are made for Mondays. I believe that the majority of the ministry that happens out of this place, out of this people, is not done in this room. The majority of the ministry, the majority of the Jesus work, the majority of the eyes being open is when you all go to work. It's when you all wake up on Monday. It's when you all meet somebody for coffee. It's when I meet someone for coffee. It's when I take my family to a restaurant. It's when we get out of here and we're around other people who don't know Jesus, and we get to do the ministry of opening people's eyes. So this week, as you stand with us, if you want to, I guess I can't make you do that, but as you stand with us and we sing one last song about what God is doing, I want you to remember that this isn't just what he's doing, it's what he's calling us to do with him, and we get to be a part of that. So as we sing about him and as we remember what he's doing, make this your declaration this morning that God, I am here to join you in opening eyes because I am made for Monday. Would you worship with us?